Welcome to the debate. If you look at a suspension bridge, you don't just watch the cars driving over it, right?
Right, you look for the stress fractures.
Exactly. You listen for the groaning steel. And right now, the American middle class is a bridge carrying significantly more weight than it was ever designed to hold.
Yeah, and that groaning steel underneath is household debt.
It really is. Right now, debt is serving as the only structure spanning the gap between, mere survival and total financial collapse. And if we look at the data from Article 5 of the 99% perspective, that bridge is visibly fracturing.
It is under immense pressure. The fundamental pillars of household stability are shaking.
Yeah?
We are seeing a lot of structural fatigue.
Let's put some scale to that fatigue, actually. The New York Fed's Q4 2025 data shows total household debt reaching a staggering $18.8 trillion.
Wow.
Yeah, and even more concerning is that 4.8% of that outstanding debt is in some stage of delinquency. We are seeing a compounded crush on working families from every direction.
It's not just one thing.
No, it's credit cards, student loans, auto loans, medical bills, all piled on top of skyrocketing rent, mortgages, insurance hikes, and property taxes.
Which brings us to the central question we're looking at today.
Right. Are rising debt and bankruptcy filings a sign of personal failure or a sign that the economy is failing working families? I will be arguing from the perspective that this debt crisis is fundamentally a structural failure, one that's systematically pushing families to the brink.
And I will be arguing that while the modern economy presents, extraordinary difficulties, personal financial responsibility and individual choices remain the critical determinants of whether a household survives.
Well, the question is not only who owes money, but why so many people have to borrow just to live. From my vantage point, the sheer cost of basic existence has just fundamentally detached from wages.
I mean, inflation has certainly played a huge part.
Huge. When we examine inflation, the absolute stagnation of real wages, the explosion in housing costs, and the reduction of government support, the math simply no longer works. The cost of survival now exceeds what average households can organically afford.
But there are choices being made there.
When the public safety net weakens, private debt is forced to step in and replace it. Debt is becoming the cost of survival.
The macroeconomic headwinds are incredibly strong right now. I'll give you that. I look at those same inflation numbers.
Yeah.
But I approach this by looking at how households actually navigate those headwinds. The absence of basic financial literacy, rigorous budgeting, and personal discipline, it severely exacerbates these structural pressures.
But emergencies happen, right?
They do, yes. But the sheer lack of emergency savings in most households, combined with highly destructive financial decisions, turns a manageable setback into a complete catastrophe.
What kind of decisions?
Like voluntarily trapping oneself in high-interest consumer cycles. The crisis is not just about bad spending habits. It is about rising costs, unstable income, and limited options.
Exactly.
But that harsh reality makes individual financial strategy more essential, not less. When the waters are rough, you don't throw away the steering wheel.
I hear what you're saying about the steering wheel, but let's look at what those rough waters actually consist of. DAP has effectively become the new emergency fund.
Well, relying on credit for emergencies is a huge shift.
Right. Historically, a family might pull from a savings account for a sudden car repair, a medical bill, or a massive spike in winter utilities.
Sure.
Today, they are relying on credit cards, personal loans, or they're just skipping bills entirely. They are financing their basic survival. How do you budget your way out of that?
People are increasingly relying on incredibly expensive predatory vehicles like buy now, pay later plans or payday loans.
Which are devastating.
Absolutely. The mechanism of a payday loan is designed to trap you. You borrow $400 for a car repair, but the annualized interest rate is 400%.
Insane.
If you can't pay it off in 2 weeks, the fee rolls over. And suddenly, you're paying hundreds of dollars just to service the interest, without even touching the principal.
Right, but people fall into these vehicles because they have no other choice.
I disagree. They fall into them because they lack fundamental budgeting skills to see the trap before they step in it. Instead of aggressively cutting unnecessary expenses at the first sign of trouble, the modern consumer reflex is to borrow to maintain a lifestyle that is mathematically unsustainable.
I have to push back on the idea that this is about maintaining a lifestyle or that there's still fat left to trim.
There's usually something.
Not for the average working family. If a family's rent jumps by $500 a month and their auto insurance goes up by $100, which is happening all over the country right now, and their wages have been flat for 3 years, their disposable income is entirely wiped out.
I know. It's tight.
Tight is an understatement. Asking them to budget their way out of a structural deficit like that doesn't make sense. You can't budget your way out of a $500 rent increase by cutting out coffee.
You can't fix a $500 deficit with a $5 coffee, that's true.
Right.
But we have to consider the opportunity cost of how they handle that deficit. When a household chooses to put a utility bill or a grocery run on a credit card, they are fundamentally borrowing against their future capacity to survive.
But is that really a choice, though?
They are choosing immediate temporary relief at the cost of long-term solvency.
Let's look at the data surrounding these credit cards. The Federal Reserve puts out a tracker called the G19 Consumer Credit Report.
Yes, I'm familiar with it.
According to their data from the first quarter of 2026, the average APR for credit cards accruing interest hit 21.52%. And yet consumer credit grew at a 5.8% annual rate in March 2026.
Which is exactly why you have to avoid it.
But people aren't taking on 21.52% interest rates to buy luxury televisions. They are using these cards at the grocery store. They are using them at the gas pump just to get to work.
Even so, the math of that 21% is brutal.
Exactly. When income doesn't cover food and fuel, the credit card fills the gap. If I'm a parent, my choice isn't between a luxury item and saving. It's between buying groceries on a 21% APR card or letting my kids go hungry. How does financial literacy solve that math problem?
It solves it by helping people understand the mechanics of what they are actually doing to their future. The fact that APRs are sitting at a predatory 21.52% is exactly why avoiding high-interest debt has to be a paramount individual priority.
But how?
Let's break down that 21%. When you put a consumable good like groceries on a credit card that compounds daily at that rate, and you only make the minimum payment, you are guaranteeing that you will pay double or triple for that loaf of bread over time.
So they should just not buy bread?
Short-term survival via credit virtually guarantees long-term financial captivity. Responsibility lies with the individual to recognize that compounding trap and alter their consumption drastically to avoid it.
Alter it how?
It is rarely as binary as starve or borrow. There are intermediate choices. Downsizing vehicles, moving to cheaper areas, utilizing food banks, restructuring debt early.
Moving to a cheaper area requires capital.
It takes effort, yes.
No, it takes cash. You need first and last month's rent. You need a deposit. You have to rent a moving truck. All of that requires the very savings we've established these families do not have.
Well, there are always trade-offs.
Let's move beyond daily consumption and look at the forms of debt that are even harder to avoid or anticipate. What happens when the debt is a prerequisite for just getting a job in the first place?
You mean student loans?
Yes, we're looking at a 10.3% delinquency rate in student loans right now, with 2.6 million borrowers referred to collections.
Student loans are a massive burden, but they're also a known quantity when you sign the paperwork. You can plan for them.
Okay, then let's talk about a burden you cannot plan for. Medical debt.
Well, that's a different animal.
Medical debt is perhaps the most glaring example of a structural failure. A person can do everything right. They can be fully insured. They can budget meticulously, and they can still face catastrophic deductibles, out-of-network surprise bills, and lost income from an illness.
It's true. Nobody chooses to have an emergency appendectomy.
Exactly. Medical debt actively turns a health problem into financial ruin.
Medical debt is a distinct category, but even within the realm of medical emergencies, there is a massive gap between those who know how to navigate the system and those who don't.
How does knowing the system help if you owe $10,000?
This is where financial literacy becomes a defensive weapon.
But if I wake up in a hospital bed with a $10,000 bill, my financial literacy doesn't make that bill disappear.
It doesn't make it disappear, but it changes how you handle it. When you get a $10,000 hospital bill, the worst thing you can do is just put it on a credit card or ignore it until it goes to collections.
So what do?
You have to ask for an itemized bill. Hospitals operate using something called a charge master rate.
I've heard of that.
It's essentially an inflated, made-up sticker price for every bandage and Tylenol. Once you demand the itemized billing codes, you can actively negotiate that debt down to what Medicare or an insurance company would actually pay them.
Which is much lower, right? Often 40 to 60% less than the sticker price. You can get on a zero-interest payment plan directly with the hospital. That is a learned financial skill.
That is incredibly useful advice, I'll admit. But we also have to look at who is most vulnerable to these sudden shocks.
Absolutely.
How do these defensive maneuvers protect Black households and communities that historically lack inherited wealth?
The racial wealth gap is very real.
It means that a white household with generational wealth might absorb a $10,000 medical emergency by liquidating a small asset or getting a short-term loan from family. A Black household without that generational cushion is forced to put that remaining balance onto the 21% APR credit card we just talked about.
And the margin of error there is virtually non-existent for marginalized communities. That hits low-wealth households significantly harder, transforming the exact same emergency into two completely different long-term economic trajectories.
That is precisely why playing defense with your finances is so critical. If you know you lack a generational safety net, mechanisms like that aggressive medical bill negotiation we just discussed, or proactive student loan repayment planning become the only shield you have.
But it's a shield against an overwhelming structural attack.
You cannot change the systemic reality overnight, but you can learn to negotiate that hospital bill. You can proactively enroll in an income-driven repayment plan for your student loans before you default. Those individual actions matter immensely when the system is stacked against you.
They matter, sure, but they are defensive maneuvers in a losing battle. And we can see the broader consequences of that losing battle in the lagging economic indicators.
You mean the collections data?
When defensive maneuvers fail, the crisis moves into collections and the legal system. The Federal Trade Commission reported receiving 471,142 debt collection complaints in 2025 alone.
That's a huge number.
And more alarmingly, bankruptcy filings surged 11.9% to 591,850 in the 12-month period ending March 2026. Bankruptcy is often the final warning sign.
Let's break down that 11.9% surge in bankruptcies, though.
It shows us that households have exhausted all those intermediate choices. The safety net is not catching people before they fall.
I look at that number through a different lens, actually. Bankruptcy is actually designed to be a safety valve.
A safety valve?
Yes. The fact that over 500,000 households and businesses could utilize Chapter 7 or Chapter 13 proves that the system does have mechanisms for relief and a fresh start.
Wait, before we go further, for the listener who hasn't been through this, what's the actual difference on the ground between Chapter 7 and Chapter 13?
That's an important distinction.
Are we talking about wiping the slate entirely clean, or just getting put on a strict government payment plan?
Well, Chapter 7 is liquidation bankruptcy. It essentially wipes the slate clean of unsecured debts like credit cards and medical bills, but at the cost of your non-exempt assets.
So the court can sell your property to pay your creditors.
Exactly. Chapter 13 is a restructuring bankruptcy. You keep your assets, but the court puts you on a very strict court-mandated 3 to 5 year repayment plan based on your income.
Got it.
The tragedy is that individuals often drain what little retirement or assets they have trying to avoid it, rather than seeking credit counseling and legal protection early.
I have to challenge the framing of bankruptcy as just a safety valve.
Why? It stops the bleeding.
A safety valve that requires you to publicly declare financial ruin isn't a safety valve. It's an emergency ejection seat. Sure, it gets you out of the exploding jet, but you're breaking your legs on the way out.
That's a bit dramatic.
You destroy your credit for a decade. That means landlords won't rent to you, some employers won't hire you, your insurance premiums go up, you survive the crash, but your financial mobility is paralyzed for years.
It's certainly a severe consequence.
But let's move toward how we actually address this. If we accept that families are under this tremendous dual pressure of structural costs and personal management challenges, what do the practical solutions look like?
We need to look at what's actionable.
How can government, banks, employers, and communities, as well as individuals themselves, reduce this pressure?
If we are talking about actionable, immediate solutions, we have to start with the individual, because that is the only locus of control a person has today.
Okay.
We need a massive cultural shift toward rigorous personal finance strategies. This means aggressive debt tracking, knowing exactly what you owe, at what rate, and to whom.
Which makes sense.
It requires a ruthless budget review to eliminate the illusion of disposable income. Families must prioritize building emergency savings over discretionary consumption.
But what about the defensive side?
On the defensive side, it means seeking nonprofit credit counseling long before collections call, mastering the kind of medical bill negotiation we talked about, and absolutely avoiding predatory payday and title loans.
Those are necessary triage tools for a bleeding patient. But to stop the bleeding entirely, we need massive structural fixes.
What kind of fixes?
We cannot budget our way out of a national housing deficit. We need systemic housing support and aggressive development to lower rents.
I can agree with the housing supply issue.
We need workforce training and better wages so that income naturally covers the cost of survival again, without requiring debt.
Well, businesses are struggling too, though.
Exactly. Which is why small businesses, which employ a massive segment of our population, need structural capital support so they don't fold under the weight of inflation and pass those job losses onto the community.
That's a fair point.
We need stronger consumer protections against predatory lending and much lower interest repayment options structurally baked into our credit system, especially for unavoidable debts like medical and educational expenses.
Those structural changes would certainly ease the burden. And I think this is where our perspectives meet.
Oh,
I maintain that personal discipline is the foundation of household survival. However, financial responsibility matters, but responsibility alone cannot fix an economy that keeps shifting more costs onto working families.
thank you.
You can be the most responsible, meticulous budgeter in the world, but if your rent doubles, your wages stagnate, and your health insurance premiums skyrocket, your spreadsheet is going to break.
That is exactly the reality we are facing, and it brings us back to the overarching narrative of the 99% Perspective series.
It's all connected.
What we are discussing today isn't happening in a vacuum. It is the direct downstream effect of everything we've tracked since the Occupy Wall Street movement.
Yes.
It's tied directly to government spending priorities that favor corporations over communities. It's tied to massive job losses and wage suppression from automation and AI displacement.
Which is a whole other huge issue.
Right. It's tied to the tightening of the housing market by institutional investors and the systematic dismantling of the financial safety net that used to protect the working class.
It is a deeply complex web, and while we may weigh the specific causes differently, whether we focus on the macro structure of the economy or the micro financial literacy of the consumer at the kitchen table, the outcome is undeniably severe.
Extremely severe.
Recognizing the interplay between these massive global economic forces and our daily choices is crucial for anyone trying to navigate this landscape.
Whether we look at it through the lens of individual choices or systemic failure, the reality is that the margin for error for the 99% has completely vanished.
It really has.
We don't have to agree on the exact ratio of blame to recognize what the data is screaming at us. Debt, bankruptcy, and delinquency are not isolated problems. They are signals that working families are carrying more risk than the economy admits. If the 99% are borrowing just to survive, then the financial safety net has truly collapsed.